Unite beyond boundaries. Innovate together. Joe's PANKRATION 2024. No border.
Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Hope you have enjoyed the Joe's PANKRATION 2024 so far. Personally, I enjoyed it a lot. A lot of great talks. So, yeah, huge shout out to the organizers for this amazing event. And yeah, thanks for joining in this session. In this session, I am going to talk about Lambda-less integrations, also known as direct integrations or functionless integrations. So first we will look into what are the Lambda-less integrations or direct integrations, and we'll go through some common use cases, and then we'll discuss some advantages and disadvantages in terms of performance, cost, and developer experience. So quick introduction about me. I'm Pubudu Jayawardana, and I am from Amsterdam, Netherlands. I work as a senior solution software engineer at PostNL, the Dutch National Postal Service. And I'm also an AWS community builder in the serverless category. And you can find me talking about AWS and specifically serverless in LinkedIn or Twitter. And I regularly blog about them in these blogging platforms too. Okay, let's talk about what Lambda-less integrations mean. So this is one of the very popular images where it shows the evolution of the responsibility between the customer and the cloud provider. Here, you can see how it differs from on-prem data centers to cloud and then to technologies like function as a service or serverless. Here, one thing is very clear. We can see the responsibility of the stack is more and more towards the cloud provider, in this case, AWS. Specifically, when it comes to serverless or function as a service, as a consumer or developer, what we need to manage is very minimal. Even though that's the case, when we write and run code in Lambda function, it's our responsibility. We need to maintain it. We need to manage it. For example, time to time, we will have to upgrade any dependencies we use. Also, we need to do code level security fixes or upgrade the Lambda runtime due to a depreciated runtime, for example. Simply, we need to maintain that Lambda function. We need to maintain that piece of code. So what if we can further delegate maintaining of this integration to AWS? That will be a perfect scenario, isn't it? So that's where the Lambda-less or direct integration comes into the picture. So with Lambda-less integration, we can replace some of the Lambda functions that we use in our system with native AWS features. So let's talk in detail about this with some examples. Let's say you have an API gateway endpoint which proxy into a Lambda function. What this Lambda function does is simply transform the incoming request and put that data into a DynamoDB table. So it's a simple scenario, and this is one of the common scenarios where we can use direct integrations. How we convert this to a direct integration is, first, we are going to change the API integration request on the API gateway. Instead of Lambda, we use the AWS service option as the integration type. Then you need to provide some parameters, inputs like region, the AWS service, in this case, it's DynamoDB, and the API action. In this case, let's say put item API action, etc. So once this is provided and set up, then API gateway will call the specific service, in this case, DynamoDB put item API, when there's a request comes in. So API gateway will handle the functionality that Lambda was supposed to do previously. So we don't need that Lambda in this scenario. However, this is not enough, because most of the cases we need to transform this input to a certain as per a certain requirement of ours. For that, we can use VTL, or velocity template language templates. Here we can build the payload we need based on the incoming request using VTL specific syntax. So when the request comes in, API gateway will transform the request as per the VTL template, and this transform request will be the payload for the put item request. In this way, you can entirely replace this Lambda function with this direct integration. So here I just took DynamoDB as an example, but there are many AWS services supported by API gateway for this type of direct integrations. Let's look into another example. This time in step functions. So when we need to call an specific AWS service within a state machine execution, we can use a Lambda function. So let's say we need to call SQS, and in SQS we need to send a message to a particular queue. Lambda function with AWS SDK is very powerful, and you can call many AWS services within a Lambda function. However, remember, we need to maintain that Lambda function. So there's a better way. Instead of the Lambda function, you can choose a direct integration like this. So when it comes to direct integration with step function, there are two options. One is optimized integrations, and next one is SDK integrations. Step function first introduced optimized integration some time ago. However, those were limited to a few integrations like SQS, SNS, Event Bridge, etc. And in 2021, step functions added the support for SDK integration. And today it supports about 12,000 API methods, and that belongs to around 220 AWS services. This was a huge step, because we can directly call most of the AWS services within step function executions. So this helps remove the intermediate Lambda functions required before. So talking about more use cases, AppSync, VTL Resolver, and Event Bridge pipes are also some of the great examples within AWS that direct integrations are supported. But in this talk, I'm not going to discuss about them in detail. So now we know what are the direct integrations, and let's discuss the advantages and disadvantages. First, advantages. The biggest advantage is you have one less Lambda to maintain, which definitely simplifies your architecture. Also, the execution cost of direct integration is less compared to a Lambda function that does the same functionality. Of course, you have to pay for the service request. For example, DynamoDB put item request. But even you use direct integration or Lambda, you have to pay for that. However, since there is no Lambda, there's no Lambda cost, so it's cost effective. Because of those 2 points together, the total cost of ownership, or TCO, is very low. This is mainly because you don't need to manage this integration. Once you set it up, AWS will take care of it. So there's no maintenance cost at all. Next one is call starts. As there is no Lambda, there's no call starts. This is great in terms of performance, and it helps a lot if you have to deal with a lot of call starts. Next advantage is that there's no effect to Lambda quotas when you use direct integrations. Let's assume you have a Lambda to respond to an API endpoint. And let's say it's a DynamoDB put item API that we are going to use. And if we use a Lambda function, and if this particular API is being called many times, for each and every time this Lambda needs to execute, which means your overall Lambda quota will be reduced because of this particular function. With direct integrations, this issue does not exist simply because there's no Lambda. So this is good for your Lambda quota as well. However, it is worth mentioning that these integrated API requests, for example, DynamoDB put items or SQS send message, those have their own quotas. However, those quotas are much higher, and you will not get into any API throttling unless you use them in quite a large amount. Okay, let's talk about the disadvantages. The biggest downside of this method is that it is hard to test the integration. So unlike Lambda function, you cannot do unit test, which means you have to depend on integration or end-to-end test, which doesn't give you quick feedback. So it's not really good developer experience. Another concern is that the languages like VTL are complex, and developer tooling around them are not so mature enough, so that if you made some errors, you will find it in later stage in a development life cycle. Next point is that some of the business logic can be hidden within those mapping templates. For example, how you compose your primary key for your DynamoDB record. Those kind of things can be hidden and not visible to your main application. Also, debugging is hard. Unlike Lambda function, we cannot use any debug points or custom logs or any traces, etc. So it will be a bit difficult to pinpoint if there's any errors happen. So what is the best? What would you choose, Lambda-less integrations, or do you prefer Lambda for this kind of functionality? As a general rule, if you have a function that does a static functionality, like transform and send it to somewhere without business logic, then it can be a good candidate for Lambda-less architecture. Finally, no architecture is 100% correct. So it is all about choosing what is most suitable for you and your use case at this particular moment. So make sure you revisit your solution more often and keep iterating. Having said that, let's wrap up the session. Thanks a lot for joining in this session. And again, huge shout out to the organizing team at Japan AWS user group. And thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you.